Jasmine came to Congress not to speak but to strike. One memo, one note, one voice in Trump's secret was undone. He cut his daughter out like she was nothing. The room froze for 47 seconds. Who will he erase next? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hearing room was heavy silent, yet thrumming beneath the surface like a grenade with its pin half pulled. Trump sat at the main table, chin-lifted voice, smooth carrying himself like a man untouchable. "I love all my children equally," he said smiling, as if tomorrow's headlines had already printed it. Some members nodded, others scribbled. But Jasmine Crockett stayed still. She didn't blink. She sat firm, steady, unreadable, with a thin folder resting on her lap. On its cover, Trump Family Trust, 2022 draft. No one saw her fingers tighten on its edge. Chairman Graves cleared his throat. "Congresswoman Crockett, you may begin." Jasmine rose without pause. Her movement was sharp, sure, and silent like steel being drawn. She didn't thank the chair. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't touch her notes because she didn't need them. She stepped forward, eyes locked on Trump. And then with a voice low, steady, and cold as stone, she asked, "If all your children are equal, then why is Tiffany Trump's name gone from your $3.2 billion estate plan?" The room exploded in silence. 1 second. 2. Trump's face twitched. His calm broke. He lunged forward, his chair screeching back. "That's fake," he shouted, voice cracking with rage. "That's a lie. You invented it." His hand slammed the table. His eyes burned at Jasmine like fire looking for something to consume. "You're not a real congresswoman. Don't you ever question my family, do you hear me?" Spit flew from his lips. His lawyer tugged his sleeve, whispering in panic, but Trump pulled away and stabbed a finger toward Jasmine. "You'll regret this. I swear you're done." Jasmine stayed still. She didn't flinch. She only stared back, quiet, unshaken, holding the folder like a knife. And for one breathless instant, Trump looked like a man realizing he had walked into his own trap. Trump's fury spread through the room like smoke, but Jasmine didn't move. She didn't shift her stance, didn't blink, didn't even look around for reaction. She already knew how this would play out, because she had fought this battle in her mind 100 times. While Trump raged, pacing and pointing like a storm ready to break, Jasmine calmly leaned forward and opened the folder on her desk. 3 sheets of paper, neat and aligned, slid out in her hands like a weapon drawn from its case. Without a word, she stepped to the front table, her heels striking with measured authority, and placed the pages down one by one. No wasted motion, no show, just cold, precise delivery, and on each page, clear as day, the watermark Trump Family Trust, Revision 622. The committee chamber fell quiet again, but this silence felt heavy or suffocating. Jasmine's voice didn't need to rise. It cut clean because the truth already carried weight. "Page 1, she said, her tone exact as a blade. "Don Jr., 28%, Ivanka, 31%, Eric Trump, 41%. Her eyes moved across the room, pausing, so each number sank like stones into water. Then steady, she gave the final blow. "And Tiffany Trump is not there." Her voice didn't shake. Her gaze never left. The folder lay open before the nation, no longer paper but a mirror. Chairs creaked. Pens stopped. Even Trump's allies leaned forward without meaning to. Jasmine turned to the last sheet, showing a red signature, bold and clear. "This came directly from the Trump organization system," she said, cool and sure. "The red signature, DJ Trump, matches verified examples." She tapped it once, then held her hand over the watermark. "The metadata is untouched. The files are unedited and time-stamped." She raised her eyes again. Not a draft, not a guess. Just numbers. Just names. For a moment, no one breathed. Jasmine's calm voice filled the silence as if she had shouted. Then came the eruption. Trump's rage didn't fade, it blew up. His jaw clenched so hard the mic caught the grind of his teeth. His palm hit the desk with a crack, startling the panel. "You're a filthy little digger," he roared, his voice sharp as broken glass. "That's a leaked draft. Do you hear me? A draft. You broke the law to get it." His finger jabbed the air toward Jasmine, fury in every word. "That's a work in progress. You think you can twist my business and parade it as theater." His other hand slammed again, making a cup jump. "This is theft. You're finished, lady. You just buried your own career." Still, Jasmine didn't move, not a blink. Her eyes stayed locked on him, silent, steady, unshaken. like she wasn't facing a president, but watching the collapse of an illusion. And for the first time that day, Donald Trump looked like a man who understood the storm wasn't waiting outside, it was already inside, and its voice was hers. Trump's roar still echoed in the chamber, but Jasmine wasn't there to argue. She was there to show what he tried to hide. As the sound of his fury faded against marble walls, Jasmine didn't raise her tone. She didn't look rattled. Her fingers, careful and steady, slid into the folder again. This time she pulled out a single page. Plain at first glance until she tilted it to the light. The panel leaned in. Their eyes caught the small gray letters in the corner, an email chain. Jasmine tapped the header once, then set it flat on the table. Internal emails, she said, her voice clear and cutting between the Trump estate lawyers and an address marked only DJT. Her tone never shook, but each word cut like a blade. Dated February 4th, 2022. She didn't glance at the committee, she fixed her eyes on Trump. Subject line, trust revision. The weight of her words wasn't loudness, it was certainty. She read it as written, proceed with the revision. Remove her name. Soft liability. D. The room froze. No one needed context. It was plain cold final. 3 orders, 1 letter, 1 plan. Jasmine let silence hang, then raised her eyes not to explain but to confront. The D at the end, she said, speaks for itself. Trump reacted at once like an eruption. He shot forward, slamming the desk so hard the microphones rattled. His face burned red. His mouth twisted, his voice cutting through like a jagged knife. I will sue you, you political trash, he shouted. The chamber jolted. Some gasped. Others leaned back in shock. But Jasmine didn't move. Trump wasn't just angry, he was breaking apart. You're a disgrace, he raged. Dragging my family through dirt for your cheap 15 minutes? His fists clenched, chest heaving. You crossed the line. This is war, but this time no one stepped in. The gallery, the aides, even the panel sat frozen, unsure if they were watching a hearing or a man watching his defenses fall. And Jasmine, she didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't even stand. She leaned toward the mic, calm, steady eyes fixed, and asked the question that broke it all. So you admit, she was cut because she didn't sell the brand. That one line didn't just sting, it exposed. No anger, no sarcasm, just fact. And the instant it left her mouth, the air itself seemed to stop. For the first time, Trump had nothing to say. The air in the chamber wasn't just tense, it had thickened into something heavier. Trump's rage still echoed faintly, but it was clear his fury had hit him harder than her. His face flushed, jaw tight, fingers twitching like they still wanted to slam the desk. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't have to. The evidence was speaking now. Slowly she opened the folder again, her hand sliding over a small metal object. It caught the lights, a USB drive, tiny but heavy enough to break a dynasty. She held it between 2 fingers, like evidence in court. This, she said firmly, was given to me last night by Michael Cohen. The room stirred this time with open shock. Heads turned toward the press box, only to remember this was closed, not yet public. Jasmine plugged the USB into the player at her desk. No buildup, no drama. Just the cold, simple click of truth. A screen behind her glowed black with one white timestamp, April 7, 2022, 11:14 a.m. There was no video, no face to soften the impact, just sound. And then it came, the voice. Sharp, dismissive, sure of itself. She's too quiet. Doesn't add anything. Cut it down, just keep Don Ivanka Barron. Tiffany's a media risk, nothing more. There was no doubt who it was. The voice was firm, fluent, and direct. It was Trump, the same man now sitting 30 feet away, frozen. The words landed slow and hard. Cut it down. Like trimming numbers, not blood. Media risk, as if a daughter was equal to bad press. A ripple of shock spread across the panel. Some leaned in as if the words might change on repeat. Others leaned back as if needing space from what they heard. But Jasmine stayed still, her body calm, her face unreadable. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The voice carried on, muttering about image control and optics. But no one was listening. They were still frozen on that single line. A line that showed more than bias, it showed a machine. A system. A man who measured not love, but value. And in that instant, Jasmine hadn't just revealed a document, she revealed a belief. But just when the silence began to settle, Jasmine leaned forward and pressed play again. No warning, no pause. The next clip wasn't just a voice, it was a system caught on tape. The audio merged with the screen behind her where page after page of the estate documents scrolled in sync with the recording. Trump's voice echoed again, cold and transactional, layered over numbers and names. Don Jr. 28%, Ivanka 31%, Eric 41%, and then nothing. No Tiffany. Her name absent, erased, redacted as if she'd never existed. Jasmine didn't look up. She let the numbers speak for themselves. Let the silence after Tiffany's omission echo longer than any accusation. Then she paused the playback, not at the end, but at the moment where absence spoke louder than presence. Her finger lifted from the button. The room held its breath. One member of the oversight panel, a veteran legislator known for his composure, broke the silence. His voice trembled, not with anger, but with something colder, clarity. He stared at the document, then at the frozen timestamp, then at Trump. "It's not the removal of assets," he said slowly, his words razor-sharp in their simplicity. "It's the removal of bloodline." The sentence didn't explode like Trump's earlier outburst. It cut deeper because it was quiet, honest. Everyone in the room felt it, like a pin dropped inside a vault. For a moment, the hearing didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like grief, like watching a family fracture under the weight of calculation. Jasmine didn't blink. Her job wasn't to dramatize the moment, it was to document it. And now the truth was no longer just data on a page or a voice in a file. It had become something far more dangerous, undeniable. The room was still recovering from the audio, still drowning in the weight of that one phrase, "media risk nothing more." But just as silence began to settle like ash, another shift swept the chamber, this time not through speakers, but through presence. People hadn't even fully digested the implications when a new current shifted through the hall, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. There was no announcement, no escort, just the unmistakable tension of a presence about to change the room. Tiffany Trump stepped into view, not from the main entrance, but from the side hallway unnoticed until the last second. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back in a way that made her expression impossible to miss. In her right hand was a worn envelope creased from time and handling. It looked out of place in a room full of digital evidence and high-tech security, but somehow it carried more gravity than anything else that day. On the front of the envelope, written in bold black ink, were the words, "To Tiffany, your 18th birthday." A handwritten note from her father. Not a speech, not a card. Just 7 words in silence. The room turned collectively as she walked toward the witness podium. Not rushed, not hesitant, just a quiet kind of certainty that forced everyone to stop pretending they were still in control. Staffers froze. Lawmakers stiffened. Jasmine lowered her eyes briefly in acknowledgement, then watched as Tiffany stepped up to the microphone with a stillness so sharp it cut the air. She unfolded the envelope and removed its contents, a check for $50,000, holding it between 2 fingers like it was radioactive. Then with deliberate precision, she read the words written above the signature. "Be smart with this. That's all." She didn't tear it. She didn't clutch it. She simply laid it on the table in front of her. Not for Trump, not for the cameras, but for the record. There was no anger in her eyes, just something colder. Resignation, maybe, or a clarity forged from years of calculated distance. Then she lifted her head and turned to face the entire room. Her voice came low, clear and controlled. "I'm not here to be pitied. I'm here because for the first time someone asked me if I ever felt erased." Those last 2 words shattered the final illusion. Erased, not neglected, not overlooked. Erased. It wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about brands or legacy or politics. It was about something deeper, being unacknowledged by blood. Her statement didn't ask for sympathy. It didn't seek redemption. It indicted a man who always believed loyalty was transactional, love was optional, and image was everything. Jasmine didn't interrupt. No one moved. Tiffany's voice had done what subpoenas and depositions couldn't make Donald Trump irrelevant in his own narrative. Climax 2 ignited. The room froze. Not one breath, not one shuffle of paper, not even the clicking of pens. Everyone stood suspended in Tiffany's words, and Trump, Donald J. Trump, sat just 30 feet away, trying to gather whatever composure he still had. He leaned back slowly, but the motion wasn't casual. It was defensive. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, scanning the room like a cornered animal. And then came the smirk, the trademark smirk he wore every time he wanted to dismiss pain as noise. But the smirk cracked. It didn't land. Because this wasn't some political opponent. This wasn't a prosecutor. This was his daughter. His lips twitched, trying to form some comeback, some counter-narrative that might dull the sharpness of what had just happened. But nothing came. No insult. No strategy. Just a dry chuckle, forced and faint, like the last breath of a joke nobody found funny. He looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time, he wasn't in control of the camera angles or the sound bites. He couldn't mute her. He couldn't spin her. She was no longer a footnote in his empire. She was a witness, and worse, a mirror. Tiffany, still at the podium, didn't look back at him. She didn't have to. Her presence said, "Everything I heard you. I saw it, and now so does everyone else." Her silence after the statement was more powerful than anything she could have added. It wasn't just a mic drop. It was a legacy fracture. For years, Trump built an image around family unity and brand loyalty. But today, his own blood had separated image from truth, and the result was devastating. The silence that followed Tiffany's statement wasn't just deafening, it was surgical. It cut through the room, carving out every excuse, every defense, every carefully managed public illusion. And in that silence, everyone turned toward one man, Trump. The center of gravity had shifted, but he refused to move with it. His smirk had faded into a tight-lipped grimace, and his fingers tapped rhythmically against the table like he was trying to summon control from muscle memory. The cameras were still rolling, the eyes still watching, but the power he once commanded had bled out of the room and pooled at Jasmine's feet. Still he sat until something inside him cracked, not with grace, not with strategy, but with raw, wounded ego. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping backward with a jolt, his face flushed red, voice trembling from fury more than fear. "Jasmine, you are not worthy to speak about my family. I am worth more than this entire Congress combined." His words echoed like glass shattering across marble, not because they held truth, but because they revealed desperation. There was no filter left, no handler to pull him back. Just a man raging at the collapse of his own mythology. Some lawmakers flinched. Others simply looked down, unwilling to meet the eyes of a man unraveling in real time. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. No response. No recoil. Just a single motion, her hand sliding the final sheet of paper forward. It was a handwritten note. Short, blunt, in unmistakable block letters. She lifted it gently, letting the silence give it weight before speaking. "No brand value. Proceed with full exclusion. D." The room froze again, but this time there was no shock, only understanding. This wasn't about inheritance. This wasn't about risk assessment. This was a man labeling his own child the way one might write off a failing product. Jasmine didn't look at the note again. She didn't need to. Her eyes locked onto Trump's, and this time it was her voice that pierced through. "So if this wasn't about money," she said, her tone low but sharp, "then what was it? Was it about who deserves to be seen?" The words hung in the air like a loaded question from history itself, not just aimed at Trump, but at every man who ever measured worth by usefulness, at every room where silence buried daughters and heirs behind brands and optics. Trump didn't answer. He couldn't. The fury in his posture began to crumble. His mouth opened slightly, no longer to shout, but to search. For words, for control, for some version of himself that hadn't just been dismantled. And then came the silence. Not polite, not procedural, but paralyzing. 47 seconds, not a single cough, not even a shift in posture. Staffers stood frozen as if a breath might break the moment too soon. One senator looked to the clock as if timing might explain the wait. But there was no explanation. Trump stared forward, no longer furious, just exposed. His hands gripped the edge of the desk like it might keep him grounded, but even gravity seemed to distance itself from him now. Jasmine stood unwavering, not triumphant, not smug, just resolute. The silence wasn't hers to break. She simply waited for truth to finish its echo. And then she ended it with a line that didn't attack, didn't mock but buried deeper than any insult ever could. If a man can cut off his own child because of image, then what does he have left that's real? It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. A closing statement in a trial that had no judge because none was needed. A sentence not just for Trump, but for every legacy built on exclusion, manipulation, and control. There were no objections, no gavel, no press team ready to spin it. Just a room full of people finally seeing the man without the mask and realizing they never liked the truth beneath it. The echo of Jasmine's final question didn't stay locked in that room. It spilled outward, carried by the currents beneath closed doors and hushed echoes. Though the hearing itself remained private, its truth found a way out within days. Leak by leak, document by document, the story seeped into internal channels oversight. Staff trusted aides, even in underground forums salted with whistleblowers. No official broadcast, no headline release, but a file labeled 47-second clip appeared on encrypted community boards. Soon afterward, cracks in walls appeared in email, with timestamps, photos of the note transcripts, dozens of unnamed sources confirming the words "media risk nothing more." That one phrase triggered something: seismic advocacy groups, civil rights coalitions, women's shelters, even legal clinics began sharing the leak internally as if it were a sacred text. They believed it, they passed it, and they rallied. Within 72 hours, dozens of organizations were meeting, strategizing, letter collections, solidarity actions, survivor testimonies. Then the letters came, not to the press, not to the White House press secretary, but to Jasmine Crockett's official congressional office address. They arrived in weathered envelopes, some stained, torn, hastily posted stamps. Others came on fine stationery ink still moist. No hashtags, no PR templates, just voice. The tone was universal, yet personal, raw, trembling, urgent. Each letter followed a familiar confession: I was Tiffany in my own family. One letter arrived with a faded school photo, tucked inside a young woman holding two baby dolls, smiling, unidentified. Another, from a retired teacher, simply said, "You made me realize my silence was not invisible. Now someone sees me." They came from across all 50 states: housekeepers, factory workers, attorneys, prison releasees. Each letter a proof that exclusion runs deeper than money. Jasmine read them in the quiet of her private office. Not alone, her small support team assembled nightly, handing her envelopes one at a time, pausing for breath between each. She didn't open them all at once as if the truth needed pacing. She didn't smile or cringe. She didn't even thank them publicly. She just cataloged each letter, imprinting every line into memory. She saved them not for trial exhibits, but as a living ledger of erasure. One woman from Texas had scribbled, "To hear a senator ask if I had ever felt erased." I broke down. I'd thought no one noticed I stopped being a daughter. That day, Jasmine's campaign calendar filled with frames, legacy rewritten collection, 350 letters. She held each one, feeling the weight of so much near invisible pain. These letters weren't sappy. They weren't seeking support. They carried a sharpened edge: anger, but also relief. A release after decades of not being welcome. Each said, I wasn't someone's brand. I was someone's child. One from a hospice volunteer ended, "Thank you for choosing voice over casket. My mother never got the chance to speak like this." A few wrote with shaky handwriting, "I'm sorry if you think I was too late to say this, but at least I finally said it." That collective chorus, anonymous yet intimate, echoed across miles. They spelled out a truth long ignored for every wealthy heir. With a name, there's someone cut out because they don't fit. Inside, Jasmine didn't react theatrically. She didn't stand on a podium and declare manifestos. But every time she read a letter, she traced the words with a slow finger. Let them sink in. Let the weight settle. Because each writer risked exposure. Each letter was a declaration of existing, bearing witness to personal erasure. One teenage girl wrote, "Dad, stop calling me his daughter," when I started talking back. I am not Tiffany, but thank you for letting me stand next to her in those minutes. That mattered more than talk shows or speeches. It was the testimony nationwide mothers and daughters finally dared to share. By the time the week ended, Jasmine had collected plateloads of mail. She placed them in acid-free archive boxes labeled Legacy Rewritten, Tiffany Responses. The room buzzed with attorneys preparing motions, activists arranging solidarity statements, but Jasmine stayed focused. She didn't mention brand value percentages, red pens. She mentioned loss. She mentioned identity. She said once they tried to erase the possibility of being counted. We're here to count their names. And the letters were living proof, a roster of erased children demanding to be seen. They validated everything she'd risked in the hearing, the exhaustion, the scrutiny, the silence people expected her to keep. Nobody leaked a photo of her holding them. There was no dramatic reveal on news networks. Instead, everyday workers and quiet survivors showed up on Zoom town halls, holding up postcards saying I too was erased. Over and over. The pattern stabilized, letter after letter, voice after voice. Jasmine didn't monetize it. She didn't stream it. But each letter extended the impact of the hearing, shifting it from a political hearing into a human reckoning. For people who felt too raw to speak, the letter spoke for them. For people who saw their names dropped from Will's weddings conversations, they saw themselves reflected in someone else's courage. By the end of that week, even Congress staffers who once doubted Jasmine looked at her differently. Not because she fired back, but because she opened the door for those voices to walk through. She didn't call for protests. She called for reflection. She said they weren't brand risks, they were human beings. And human beings matter more than image. The letters remained in her office, but their echoes leaked into every community across the country. And through them, Jasmine's quiet victory became something that transcends labels, partisanships, and pundit talk. Instead, it became a ledger of memory loss and the quiet power of being acknowledged exactly as you are. The outrage had been simmering since the day Jasmine walked out of that hearing chamber. But Trump's fury didn't fizzle behind closed doors. It hardened, calcified, and marched into court as a $125 million civil lawsuit. The papers landed with the weight of a personal vendetta, not just a legal maneuver. Filed in the Southern District of Florida, the complaint accused Jasmine of defamation, malicious interference with private family matters, and intentional infliction of emotional and reputational harm on a former president. The media devoured it instantly. Headlines blared, Trump sues Crockett for a $125 million congressional firebrand. Faces Trump lawsuit, revenge or retaliation. But Jasmine didn't blink. No press conference, no outraged tweet, no appearances on late-night talk shows. Just silence until her response landed 4 days later with the sharpness of a scalpel. Her rebuttal wasn't theatrical, it was surgical. Attached were 52 pages of documentation, authenticated and time-stamped. Exhibits included chain of custody logs for the USB files, metadata for the email evidence, and a sworn affidavit from Michael Cohen verifying the recording's origin. There were no embellishments, no emotional appeals, just unshakable proof. And then came the Constitutional Foundation, Article 1, Section 6 of the U.S. Constitution, the speech or debate clause. Jasmine had delivered her statements during an official congressional hearing within the scope of her oversight authority under oath and within jurisdiction. Any legal scholar knew what that meant: absolute legislative immunity. The moment that clause was invoked, the civil claim's spine broke in half. But Jasmine didn't stop there. Her team included a constitutional litigator and a former White House ethics counsel. They sent a message not just of defense, but of institutional strength. This wasn't personal revenge, it was democratic responsibility. Still, Jasmine understood that truth in legal filings wasn't always truth in the public eye. So she chose her next move carefully. A procedural floor session was scheduled that week, no cameras, no press, just her voice transcribed into congressional record. As she stepped up to the podium, the room felt strangely quiet. Not empty quiet. Even those who had once dismissed her as too loud, too theatrical, or just playing to the base now listened in full. They had heard the tape. They had seen the documents. And for many, they had seen something else, a reflection of something in their own lives they didn't want to admit. Jasmine stood in a charcoal blazer, no flair, no designer pin, just a white folder in her hands and a truth she refused to dilute. Her words sliced through the air like tempered steel. I did not trespass into his property, she said, her voice steady and firm. I did not deface his assets. I did not profit from secrets. Her hands rested flat against the podium. No notes, no prompter, just lived conviction. I did what this chamber entrusted me to do. I illuminated how a father can erase a child not with violence, but with paperwork. Not in rage, but in branding. A few heads dropped low. Others stared straight ahead. No one interrupted, and I will not apologize for choosing sunlight over silence. She let that sentence breathe, not to perform, but to let it echo. It wasn't a line, it was a threshold. Even some of her usual detractors in the chamber didn't speak up. They recognized the difference between provocation and proof, and Jasmine had delivered the latter. She hadn't made wild accusations. She hadn't speculated or theorized. She had revealed actual decisions, business choices, legal edits, financial exclusions, all bearing one man's signature. And those decisions had nothing to do with public service or national security. They had everything to do with image management, internal loyalty rankings, and the erasure of a daughter from legacy and ledger alike. Jasmine's statements weren't sensational, they were procedural, and that was what made them more lethal. Because facts once spoken under oath don't require emotion to become fire, they only need silence to spread. As reporters scrambled outside for comment, Jasmine exited the chamber from a back corridor bypassing the media swarm. She wasn't avoiding attention, she was letting the system speak for itself. Her office released a short written statement the next morning. My remarks were delivered in my capacity as a congressional representative, performing official oversight duties. The lawsuit is not just unconstitutional, it's retaliatory. And the truth, no matter how inconvenient, will always outlast branding. No lawyer stood next to her at a podium. No celebrity endorsements followed. But within 24 hours, civil rights groups, legal watchdogs, and even former DOJ officials voiced support. Not because they all agreed with Jasmine politically, but because they saw what was happening, a weaponized lawsuit meant to punish transparency. Still, the most powerful defense Jasmine issued wasn't filed in court. It came from her mouth one final time in her last scheduled remarks before summer recess. With a packed chamber and no vote on the docket, she walked up folder in hand and spoke softly, almost like a confession. I didn't hack his finances. I didn't leak secrets. I didn't smear a family, she said, voice even. I simply opened the books and asked why one name had been wiped clean. Murmurs stirred, but no one rose. He claims harm. I claim accountability. He seeks money. I seek light. And then came the quote that would echo through think pieces and legal journals. For months, I didn't trespass his wealth. I illuminated how he chose to delete his child. She left the podium not with applause, but with something rarer, uninterrupted silence. The kind of silence that doesn't scream approval, but acknowledgement. That what had been said couldn't be unsaid, and what had been revealed couldn't be unlearned. Trump could file a dozen more lawsuits. He could throw legal smog over the story for months. But deep down, the country had already heard the thing it couldn't shake. That maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a story about defamation. It was a story about deletion. Not of wealth, not of property, but of one daughter's place in the line of sight of the man who made her and the woman who dared to say it out loud. The silence after Jasmine's congressional testimony hadn't faded before the firestorm ignited somewhere unexpected, the business pages. While most were still digesting the courtroom tension, a new headline sent shockwaves across the country. The Wall Street Journal, not known for sensationalism, dropped a precision-guided bombshell. Exclusive Trump org memo suggests Tiffany Trump removal was strategic, not personal. And just like that, everything Jasmine had implied gained a paper trail. This wasn't rumor or commentary. This was documentation, real time-stamped and damning. The article displayed a scan of an internal memo from Trump Organization dated 6 months before the revised will. Not 6 weeks, not 6 days. 6 full months before Donald Trump ever signed off on the change that removed Tiffany. The memo was simple, but its language struck like a corporate dagger. Tiffany causes brand fatigue. Evaluate exclusion, not donor-friendly. That was it. 3 chilling sentences, surgical, impersonal, and heavy with intent. The words brand fatigue ignited an immediate visceral reaction. To corporate executives, it was familiar lingo. To the public, it was inhuman. Social media exploded with one core question: what kind of father uses marketing terms to measure his child? Thousands retweeted the memo with one comment over and over again: she's not a product, she's a person. Television pundits argued the phrasing for hours. Legal experts debated its implications, but none of them could deny what it confirmed: Tiffany Trump's exclusion had been orchestrated. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't impulsive. It was drafted, evaluated, and filed like an asset write-off. The memo had been signed internally by an executive known to work closely with Donald Trump. No initials, no direct order. But the proximity was enough to cast a long, dark shadow. And once the timeline was overlaid, the pattern became impossible to ignore. First the memo, then the revised draft of the Trump Family Trust, then the audio Jasmine played, then the handwritten note, no brand value. Proceed with full exclusion. One step at a time, a daughter had been erased, and now America could see the blueprint. In the days following the article's release, editorial boards struggled to maintain objectivity. The New York Times wrote, "If true, this is not just a betrayal of blood. It is a commodification of it." Even conservative outlets like the Washington Examiner published op-eds with titles like Tiffany Trump and the Cruelty of Corporate Fatherhood. Overnight, Tiffany became the face of something far larger, an unspoken epidemic. Millions of Americans who had felt disposable in their own families suddenly had a name, a symbol, a story. It wasn't just her silence that spoke volumes. It was the math, the percentages, the phrasing, and now the strategy. Jasmine Crockett made no formal statement. She didn't need to. The memo said everything louder than any press conference could. That document validated every word she'd brought to light in the hearing, only now it wasn't filtered through emotion or accusation. It was framed in cold, calculated strategy. The removal of Tiffany had been evaluated as one might eliminate a liability from a quarterly earnings report. Not donor-friendly? That line in particular stung with a twisted kind of honesty. Not loved, not included, just bad for fundraising. It didn't take long before legal scholars weighed in. They noted that because the memo had been written prior to the revised will, it undermined any claim that the trust had been changed solely based on family dynamics or private emotional decisions. Instead, the language proved corporate foresight, a maneuver designed not to protect the family, but to preserve the brand. Behind closed doors, financial lawyers quietly admitted this was one of the clearest instances they'd seen of preemptive image management masquerading as inheritance planning. It wasn't just a bad look, it was evidence. Meanwhile, donor circles, particularly those tied to elite fundraising networks, began to ask their own uncomfortable questions. Was the Trump family now selecting heirs based on appeal to donors? Was bloodline now negotiable if the optics didn't align? If so, what did that mean about the rest of the inner circle? And if Tiffany, a daughter, could be wiped away with a memo, who else had a target on their back? One particularly scathing think piece from The Atlantic captured the mood. "We used to fear being disinherited by will. Now we fear being deleted by memo." Cultural anthropologists began comparing the Trump org memo to techniques used in cold hierarchical systems where human beings become roles become costs, and costs are cut. A phrase emerged online that went viral in under a day: "Tiffany fatigue" is corporate speak for daughter deletion. Inside Congress, murmurs began to rise again. Lawmakers who had previously stayed silent started reviewing internal ethics procedures. Could corporate documentation like this be admissible in oversight hearings? Did it qualify as pattern of conduct evidence? Jasmine stayed quiet, but her allies didn't. One senator remarked off camera, "She didn't just shine a light, she flipped the breaker." The most powerful reaction, however, didn't come from lawyers or journalists. It came from people. Letters flooded Jasmine's office, handwritten, emotional, raw. Stories from daughters disinherited for marrying the wrong person. Sons pushed aside for not joining the family business. Young people told they were too soft, too quiet, not marketable. The line echoed again and again: "I was Tiffany too." It was no longer about a hearing, no longer about a family. It had become about a truth millions never had the language to say aloud until now. A truth hiding inside households, bank accounts, country clubs, and trusts. Jasmine hadn't just opened a file. She'd cracked open a vault that couldn't be closed. And now that America had read the memo, there was no one reading it. The aftermath didn't roar. It didn't arrive with camera flashes or viral headlines. It unfolded in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention because it already has the final word. 3 days after the Wall Street Journal released the Trump org internal memo, Jasmine was back in her office in the Rayburn building. No crowds outside, no urgent knock at the door, just her, the steady ticking of the wall clock, and a small stack of files waiting for review. A Tuesday like any other, until it wasn't. At 2:17 p.m., her assistant knocked once, then opened the door slightly, holding a cream-colored envelope. No urgency, no panic, just gravity. From the federal court, he said quietly. Marked confidential, but I thought you'd want to see it. She took it without a word. Her fingers slid under the flap, careful but swift, like someone disarming a fuse. Inside a single sheet of paper, official stamped and final. Her eyes scanned the heading notice of voluntary dismissal with prejudice. She read it again and again. She wasn't the type to misread legalese, but this wasn't just legal. It was personal. Trump had dropped the lawsuit, not for delay, not for reconsideration, not because of some procedural flaw. No, he dropped it with prejudice, which in the language of the courts meant he was barred from ever filing it again. The case was dead, buried, a tactical retreat masquerading as a legal formality. For a man who'd once barked in front of the entire committee, Jasmine, Ko Kong Shungjanoi Vegia Jin Toi, this move spoke louder than any threat. He'd thrown the full weight of his name, his firm, his power at her in a $125 million suit. And now without a press release or warning shot, he folded. No media outlet had the story. No reporter was camped outside her door. There would be no press conference from Trump's legal team. No apology, no explanation, no reckoning. Just a quiet surrender folded into an envelope. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, staring not at the paper, but through it as if trying to see the path it had traveled to get here. She imagined the closed-door meeting, the tense conference call, the hush among senior counsel as they calculated the cost not in dollars but in narrative, in legacy, in the irreversible optics of what they'd done and what she'd unearthed. Her desk was still, no victory music, no applause, just the unmistakable shift of atmosphere when a storm breaks and leaves no thunder behind. She turned to her side drawer, unlocking it with a quiet flick. Inside lay an object she hadn't touched since this all began, a wooden box worn at the corners but polished with care. It was handcrafted by a former staffer's grandfather, gifted to her during her first term. On its surface, a brass plaque gleamed under the afternoon sun, legacy rewritten. She had engraved it herself months ago, long before the Trump subpoena, long before the audio tapes, long before Tiffany's voice shook the hearing room. It was meant for something else back then, a place to hold personal notes, memories, little slips of paper that told a story few ever saw. But now it had become something else, an archive, a tomb, a ledger of a battle that didn't just end in defeat, but in a man's silent recognition of what he could no longer fight. With both hands, Jasmine picked up the court notice. She read it one final time, then placed it gently into the box. On top of it, she laid the printed memo from Trump org. Tiffany causes brand fatigue. Evaluate exclusion, not donor-friendly. Then the handwritten note, no brand value. Proceed with full exclusion. D. Then the transcript from the USB audio, she's too quiet. Doesn't bring anything to the table. Tiffany's a media risk, nothing more. Each one placed with care like a soldier honoring names on a wall. Not for revenge, not even for remembrance, but for clarity. So no one could ever say, we didn't know. She closed the box. One soft click. But that click carried the weight of every shouted denial, every gaslighted defense, every time a daughter was told she didn't fit the brand. And she sat there for a moment, fingers still resting on the lid. The room didn't feel triumphant. It felt resolved. The kind of quiet that comes not from winning, but from outlasting a machine built to bury you. Outside the window, the Capitol dome gleamed under the fading sky. Somewhere aides were filing papers. Lawmakers were debating policy. History was pretending to move on. But inside that room at that desk, something rare had happened. A man who claimed to own truth had been silenced by proof. And a woman who was told she was too loud, too black, too direct, had dismantled his entire case without ever raising her voice. As she stood, Jasmine picked up the wooden box. She didn't hold it like a trophy. She held it like a message no courtroom could erase. She didn't say a word when she left that room, but the silence that trailed behind her wasn't empty. It echoed like a verdict that needed no judge, no jury. Jasmine walked out of the Capitol not as someone who'd won a battle, but as someone who had redrawn the battlefield. The war hadn't been about wealth, or inheritance, or even legacy. It was about something far more dangerous of visibility, about who gets to be seen, who gets to speak, and who gets erased. And in that final act, when the lawsuit vanished and the wooden box closed, she reminded the world that the most dangerous truth isn't the one that's shouted, it's the one that survives the silence. Because at its core, this was never just about Tiffany Trump. It was about every person who's ever been cut out of their own story because they didn't look the part, speak the part, or sell the brand. Jasmine didn't just put a spotlight on Trump's choices, she forced the country to ask a question it never wanted to answer. What happens when blood isn't thicker than optics? When image becomes the currency of worth and people become PR liabilities? Families turn into boardrooms and love turns into leverage. That memo didn't just say evaluate exclusion, it announced a model of power where you're only valuable if you're marketable. And Tiffany, in all her quiet, inconvenient humanity, was collateral. Just like too many others. Daughters, sons, wives, husbands, forgotten, muted, discarded behind executive doors labeled strategy. But something changed the day Jasmine pressed play, because that wasn't just a USB drive, it was a mirror. And when the nation looked into it, they didn't just see Trump. They saw themselves. They saw the dinner tables where certain children are never asked how their day went, the offices where women speak up and get labeled difficult, the homes where silence isn't peace, it's punishment. People wrote to her in droves, but one line kept appearing again and again, handwritten in ink that looked shaky but honest. I was Tiffany in my own house, and those letters didn't ask for headlines. They asked for healing, for recognition, for someone finally to say that their invisibility had been real and now seen. One woman wrote from Iowa. My father gave my brother a truck when he turned 18. He gave me a calculator and said, "You'll need this more." I haven't spoken to him in 12 years. Another came from a retired Marine in Georgia. I disowned my son because he married someone I didn't approve of. This hearing made me wonder if I buried a legacy I never deserved to carry. A girl from Michigan simply wrote, "Thank you for asking the question no one ever asked me, do I feel erased?" And suddenly a story that began in a sealed room cracked open a nation's wound. Jasmine's words, "If a man can cut out his child for image, what does he have left that's real stuck like thorns?" Because whether in politics or families or boardrooms, America had built systems that rewarded the loud, the polished, the powerful, and punished the inconvenient. But now the question wasn't just rhetorical, it was personal. From every corner of the country, people were whispering things they'd never dared say out loud. I wasn't the favorite, I was edited out of the will. He said I didn't look enough like him to be his daughter. She told me I ruined her public image. It wasn't just Jasmine's courage that made the moment powerful. It was her restraint. She never shouted, never gloated. She just laid the facts down and let the silence do the cutting. That silence exposed a sickness we rarely name the weaponization of visibility. In a culture that chases likes photo ops and curated legacy, the ones who don't fit are too often cropped out. Not because they failed, but because they didn't sell well enough. Tiffany was a Trump by birth, but not by optics. And in a single sentence, Tiffany's a media risk. A father didn't just cut a name, he cut the thread that made him human. And so the deeper lesson came not from law or politics, but from the fracture between what is sold and what is sacred. You can inherit land, money, stocks, planes, but you cannot inherit integrity. You build it, moment by moment, decision by decision. Trump walked into that hearing a man armed with wealth, power, and arrogance, but he left without the one thing that actually survives you when your name no longer trends honor. And Jasmine, she entered with documents. She left with something no brand strategist could ever build trust. Not the kind that sells books, the kind that rebuilds homes. Because when a system tries to erase people, the first weapon isn't violence, It's silence. And the first resistance isn't outrage, it's acknowledgement. That's what Jasmine offered. Not revenge, not humiliation. She gave the most radical gift someone can give the erased space. Space to be heard, to be mourned, to be validated. And that's why the hearing mattered more than any headline. It reminded us that what's hidden behind polished doors and glossy legacies is often more broken than we dare admit. So the real story isn't about the memo, or the lawsuit, or even the exclusion. The real story is this. In a nation obsessed with dynasty image and curated legacy, a woman walked into a room, asked one question, is she being erased, and made the world pause long enough to realize how many others were too. That is the lesson. That is the mirror. That is the rewrite. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been sidelined, cut out deemed not brand aligned, then know this. You were never the risk. You were always the truth. The silence that followed didn't fade. It echoed. It morphed into something people could no longer ignore. That moment of resignation in Jasmine's office, closing the wooden box labeled Legacy Rewritten, transformed into a reckoning. And now we arrive at the crucial question, what do you do with a truth like that? Because here's the hard truth, stories like this don't just change the people involved. They deliver a message to everyone watching. They whisper, look around you. Who's missing? Who's being erased? That question isn't just rhetorical, it's a challenge. Not to institutions, though they matter, but to individuals, to the listeners, to those who've seen someone erased in their own lives and did nothing, to the people who said quietly, that's between them. The story of Jasmine Crockett isn't a moment in American politics, it's a mirror. You could watch it as a bystander, or you could see yourself in it, because if silence is consent, then speaking is upheaval. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do isn't sign a petition or post a hashtag, it's ask a question out loud. Ask where is she? Ask why wasn't he invited? Ask who decided I don't fit? That kind of question has power because it forces a system to name itself. It forces a culture dependent on image to acknowledge its own ghosts. Jasmine didn't storm a courtroom with a megaphone. She didn't use threats or ads. She asked one question and let the truth do the rest. That's the kind of courage we can all borrow. And here's another thing you can do. Look for the invisible people in your world. Not metaphorically, literally. In your office, your group chat, your family, your church, your volunteer board, your class. There's always someone who's quiet, who submits every report on time, yet never gets credit, who doesn't raise points in meetings, who stops asking questions because no one listens. You know who I'm talking about. Maybe you've met them, or maybe you are them in someone else's story. What would you risk to make space for that person? Could you say, tell me your name, I'll listen. Could you ask, what voice have we silenced today? That's how action begins. It isn't found in grand gestures, it's found in small ones. When a child is ignored at the dinner table, ask her name. When an employee receives no instruction or feedback, ask what he wants to achieve. When your community boards only promote people who look like the board, ask why. When someone says you're too emotional or you're not marketable or you don't fit the narrative you say you belong anyway. That's not charitable, it's profound. It resets the narrative person by person until exclusion loses its power. If you're a parent, caregiver, teacher, mentor, speak up for the child who disappears in the background. You don't need data, you need observation. You don't need approval, you need to listen. If you're a manager, teammate, or coach, redirect credit. Ask who else contributed. Make sure every person in the room hears their name. If you're a journalist, blogger, or podcaster, tell stories not for ratings, but to give voice. If you're an influencer, make surface inclusion deeper, highlight invisible contributors. If you're a voter or resident, write letters, attend meetings, call attention when the overlooked or dismissed, not to punish, but to balance. Because legacy is not inherited, it's earned, and often by the quietest people in the room. When you wonder whether it matters, remember this one question changed the fate of a presidential heir. One document dismantled a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. One tape turned a legacy into an indictment. But what if 10 quiet but determined voices asked the same questions in their communities? What if 20 women said, I am Tiffany too, in homerooms, staff break rooms, fundraising dinners? What if a retired grandmother spoke up in a town meeting? What if a Muslim father asked, "Why did they talk down to my daughter?" The echo of many personal truths is more powerful than any court summons. It's generational. And it doesn't stop with words, it interrupts systems. That's the responsibility. Not to become political celebrities, but to become quiet disruptors, the ones who ask the question no one else dares ask. The ones who don't shift seats, but shift atmospheres. The ones who break the pattern not with rage, but with presence. Because every time someone says, "I matter," in a moment, when the world doesn't expect them to, something powerful shifts. Yes, poring over evidence is noble. Debating the ethics is important, but real change. It happens when you pull someone back into the story, when you sit next to the excluded, listen to their silence, and say to them and to everyone watching, "You belong here. I see you." Do it where you are, in small offices, hidden families, local churches, book clubs, underpasses, nursing homes, in that volunteer group that never looks like you, in that neighborhood meeting, in that corporate boardroom. Do it beside that young person who smiles too quietly, that immigrant who stays hush, that caretaker who never gets credit, that daughter who's never invited into legacy planning. Because here's the thing, when you bring only the loudest, easiest, most polished voices into legacy spaces, you get sound bites, but you never get truth. And truth isn't loud, it's persistent, it's grounded, and it deserves to be heard even when it demands discomfort. It deserves to be counted even when it doesn't raise funds. It deserves to exist even when it doesn't trend. So this is your call to action. Stop consuming this story like a spectacle. Start applying it like a torch. Light it in your circle. Examine the identities you've ignored. Ask why, then act. Create space. Speak the unspoken. Count the unseen. Because people who've been excluded don't need your pity. They need your presence. They don't need permission. They need acknowledgement. And they don't need to fit your brand. They only needed a place at the table. Legacy isn't about inheritance. It's about inclusion. And if you're alive, you have the power to rewrite it in at least one person's life. That's the final scene of your story as well as mine. A story where the loudest name doesn't win, but the right name gets remembered. And if you're wondering how to start small. Start with one person who's been left out of a conversation they should have been in. Maybe it's your sibling who never got invited to the table. Maybe it's your coworker who always gets interrupted. Maybe it's your friend who stopped sharing because the room always gets quiet when they speak. Don't wait for a grand opening. Knock on the door yourself. Show up unannounced to the silence. Break it not with noise, but with presence. Your presence, consistent and clear, says more than applause ever could. Because change doesn't need a spotlight, it needs someone who refuses to look away. If you lead people, lead differently. Make inclusion more than a footnote. Turn meetings into spaces where names aren't just remembered, they're respected. Ask who's never been asked. Ask what room are we replicating, and what voices are we erasing without even realizing it. Look around you not just at who's present, but at who's missing. Inclusion isn't about tokenism, it's about truth-telling. And the truth is, if every room looks the same, the system's broken. Jasmine didn't break the system by yelling. She broke it by exposing what had already been built to ignore people like Tiffany. You can expose it too by choosing not to replicate it. If you've ever felt erased, remember, silence is not shame, it's space. And in that space, you get to redefine who you are. You're not a footnote in someone else's legacy. You're the headline in your own. Let this story remind you, you don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You don't need a check to be valid. And you don't need a legacy to speak. You only need courage. Courage to ask. Courage to show up. Courage to not disappear even when someone tries to write you out. So write someone back in today. Bring their name into a room that forgot them. Tell them, "I see you." Tell them you matter even when no one's watching. That's not just kindness, it's justice. And if enough of us do that, we won't just rewrite a legacy. We'll build a world where no one has to prove they deserve to stay in it. Because in the end, the most powerful sentence in this story wasn't spoken by a lawyer or a president. It was spoken by a daughter. "I'm not here for pity. I'm here because someone finally asked if I ever felt erased." Now the question is, who in your world needs to be asked the same thing? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.